He understood what she was saying, though. Even stepping onto this path didn't commit them fully, did it? They could always turn back. In theory. He buried his face in his hands. His mind flashed to a memory. 2 years ago, when David was 6, the boy had nearly died from malaria. They had no money for a hospital. James had rushed him to a free clinic miles away, where they sat in a crowded corridor all night. He remembered praying desperately, "God, save my son and I'll do anything." David survived, but indeed James had been willing to trade anything at that moment. Now here they were, with a devil's bargain on the table. Grace squeezed his arm, her voice barely audible. "I already lost my faith in miracles, James. Maybe this is the only miracle we'll ever get." For a long time, James didn't speak. Outside, the neighbor's baby started crying, and the mother crooned a lullaby to hush it. The sound was sad and sweet through the thin walls. Grace wiped her eyes and waited, heart thudding so hard she felt it might wake the children. Finally, James raised his head. His face looked like that of an old man, defeated and broken. There was no fight left in his eyes, only sorrow. "God forgive us," he whispered, each word heavy as stone. "We'll go." Grace released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. In that moment, she felt both immense relief and abject terror flooding through her. She rested her forehead against James's shoulder, and they held each other in the darkness, both silently weeping for the choice they had just made. The night of the new moon arrived, moonless and starless behind gathering clouds. Grace and James left their home late, when the children were fast asleep. Grace had fed Emma and David a rare treat that evening, a whole yam between them, seasoned with a little salt. She watched them eat with an aching heart, memorizing every bite, every smile. She told herself it was just in case they changed their minds, and this dinner wouldn't be their last with the kids. But deep down, she feared it was a farewell meal. They asked a neighbor girl from 2 huts down to sit in the shack while the kids slept. "We're going to the vigil at church," Grace had lied unsteadily. The neighbor, used to them attending night vigils in the past, agreed easily enough for a small fee. Grace had no money to give, but promised a portion later. Somehow that didn't matter now. Hand in hand, Grace and James walked through the narrow dirt paths of Ayobo under cover of darkness. The settlement was mostly asleep. Only distant drums from a bar and the barking of stray dogs punctuated the thick silence. Every shadow and corner seemed alive with menace to James, who gripped his wife's hand as if for dear life. He wondered if someone or something might try to stop them. A sign from God, perhaps. But nothing and no one blocked their way as they neared the edge of the community. The old baobab tree by the abandoned well was a place children were warned to avoid. It stood twisted and tall against the sky, leafless at this time of year, its bark scarred by age. The well beside it was a crumbling relic from decades past, long dried up and rumored to be haunted. Parents loved to scare their kids with tales of spirits lurking there. Tonight, those tales felt all too real. The couple approached hesitantly. At first it seemed nobody was there, and James felt a surge of hope. Maybe the woman wouldn't show. Maybe this could be their way out, proof that they'd tried, but it wasn't meant to be. A low humming sound drifted from behind the baobab, a voice carrying an old melody. Grace recognized the tune. It was a Yoruba lullaby, the kind her grandmother used to sing about sweet children and safe sleep. The sound sent a prickling over her skin. The mysterious woman emerged from behind the massive trunk. She was no longer hunched or frail. She stood tall, her shawl discarded to reveal a crimson wrapper patterned with strange symbols. Around her neck glinted a necklace of what looked like animal teeth. Grace could swear the woman's eyes almost glowed in the dark. She was humming that lullaby with a knowing smile. "You came," the woman said softly, as if pleased but not surprised. "Welcome, Grace. And this must be your husband." James instinctively stepped a bit in front of Grace, protective despite his fear. "I am," he answered, voice tight. He struggled to keep his composure as he looked at this eerie figure. There was something in the woman's presence that made the hair on his arm stand. The woman bowed her head slightly in greeting. "Very good. You both have decided to accept help." Grace swallowed. We want to know what's to be done," she said quietly. If we agree." The woman gave a slow nod and beckoned with her hand. "Follow me then. The master is waiting." The grip on James's hand tightened as they followed the woman beyond the well, along a footpath that led into a small grove of trees. No one ever came this far out at night. It was said criminals used the bush beyond Ayobo to dump bodies or perform their dark rites. Fitting, James thought grimly. We are no better than criminals now, are we? After a few minutes they reached a clearing lit by a circle of candles placed on the ground. In the center was a chalk-drawn symbol on the bare earth, intricate loops and shapes that neither Grace nor James recognized. The air smelled of incense, thick and cloying, mixed with something metallic. Blood, James realized with a lurch. 3 other figures stood around the circle, faces obscured by the flickering candlelight. One was a tall man in a black robe, shirtless underneath with white tribal marks painted across his chest. Another was a woman with long, unbound hair, her eyes closed as if in trance, humming that lullaby still. The last figure was short and stooped, possibly an elderly man, clutching a drum which he beat softly to the rhythm of the humming. At the arrival of Grace and James, the tall man in black spoke in a deep voice. "Is this them?" "Yes," answered the old woman who had led them. She moved forward into the circle and gestured for the couple to come stand at its edge. "They are ready to do what is required." Grace felt her legs trembling beneath her. James put a steadying arm around her waist. They stepped forward together. The tall man, clearly the priest or leader, looked them over with piercing eyes. By the candlelight, Grace noticed his face was painted, half white, half charcoal black. He seemed more spirit than human in that eerie glow. "You seek the gifts of wealth and prosperity beyond your wildest dreams?" he asked. Grace and James nodded, both too paralyzed to speak. "The price has been explained?" the man continued. Grace's voice came out in a half-sob. "Our children." The man raised a hand to silence her. "The sacrifice of blood is the oldest law, the innocent for the bounty. Are you prepared to give what is most precious to you in exchange for the world at your feet?" James thought of David and Emma sleeping peacefully back home, unaware of the betrayal about to happen. His stomach churned, and he could not find breath to answer. Grace, tears spilling silently down her cheeks, nodded slowly. James closed his eyes as anguish tore at him, but then he also forced himself to nod. There was no turning back now. "Very well," intoned the priest. He motioned to the woman with unbound hair. She stepped forward and opened a small calabash bowl she had been holding. Inside it, something glinted. 2 small, razor-sharp knives, more like elongated ritual daggers, and a dark liquid that could be oil or blood. Grace's knees nearly gave out. James held her up, but he felt barely stronger. The priest took one dagger and handed it to James. The old woman, Grace's recruiter, took the other, and, to Grace's surprise, pressed it into Grace's own hand. The metal was cold, and Grace's hand shook violently around it. "You both must do it together," the priest said, voice low and resonant. "The sacrifice must be willingly given by both mother and father, bound by your oath and love, to be acceptable." Grace felt like she was watching herself from far away. This isn't real. This can't be real. A part of her mind gibbered. Yet the weight of the knife and the heat of the candles and the oppressive incense All said it was very real. James was breathing hard beside her, sweat pouring down his face. "Bring them," the priest commanded with a wave of his hand. From the shadows beyond the candle circle, 2 more figures emerged. How had Grace not noticed them before? 2 women, each carrying a small sleeping child in their arms. Grace's heart stopped. The children, her children, were here. Emma and David looked as though in deep slumber, their limbs limp, heads lolling against the women's shoulders. Grace nearly collapsed. "No. Oh God, no," she whimpered. She realized with horror that the neighbor girl must have been part of this, or perhaps tricked or overpowered. Somehow these people had taken her babies from their bed. The thought made Grace want to scream, maternal fury and terror rising. But a stronger part of her reminded, "This is what you came for." James made a strangled sound and started forward, perhaps to snatch the children away, but the priest fixed him with an iron glare. "Do not break the circle," he warned sharply. "The moment is at hand. If you falter now, you endanger all souls here, including theirs." James froze, caught between instinct and fear. The 2 women stepped into the circle and gently laid Emma and David on the ground within the chalk symbol. The children did not stir. Maybe they had been drugged or enchanted asleep. Grace prayed they felt no fear or pain now. "Mother, Father," the priest said solemnly, "kneel by your children." Hands shaking uncontrollably, Grace lowered herself to her knees beside 5-year-old Emma, while James knelt by David. Candles cast dancing shadows on the children's small faces. Grace brushed a curl from Emma's forehead. "She looks like an angel," Grace thought, her heart breaking. Emma's lips were slightly parted, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. "My baby, oh my baby." She felt James's presence across from her. He was sobbing openly now, shoulders shaking. Grace was crying too, the tears coming in waves that nearly blinded her. The priest began chanting in a low voice, and the others responded in an ancient call and response that seemed to make the air vibrate. "By the gods of our ancestors, by earth and sky, by blood and sacrifice, we call thee," the priest intoned in Yoruba. The words were dense, echoing with power. Grace only caught fragments of meaning. Wealth without end, fortune overflowing, lives of kings and queens. The old woman crouched beside Grace, and the unbound hair woman beside James. They placed guiding hands on the couple, positioning them. Grace felt her hand with the dagger being gently directed over Emma's small chest. She bit down on her lip till she tasted blood, trying to hold back a scream of grief. James held his dagger poised over David's throat, trembling so badly that the woman next to him had to help steady his arm. The chanting rose in intensity. The drumming grew faster. The night air itself felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. Grace looked down at Emma's face through her tears. "I'm so sorry, my precious girl. Forgive me." In her mind, she said a final prayer. Not to God. She felt too unworthy to speak to God now, but to her daughter. "I hope your spirit will understand why Mommy did this. I hope you'll be at peace. Oh God, oh God. Now give them safe passage and open the gates to your prosperity," the priest suddenly cried out, voice commanding and terrifying. In a synchrony that felt fated and yet impossibly cruel, Grace and James plunged the daggers down. Grace felt the blade sink in and cut through resistance, through the tender flesh of her child. A horrible wet warmth gushed over her hand as she struck Emma's heart. Emma jerked once, a tiny spasm, and then was still. Her eyes never opened. James let out an inhuman wail as his blade sliced across David's neck, spraying red across the chalk lines. The boy's body shuddered and slackened. Neither child made a sound. For a moment time froze. Grace could not breathe, could not think. The world tilted under her as if she might faint. She heard James screaming, "No! What have we done? Oh God, what have we done?" He dropped the bloodied knife, reaching for David's limp body, but the assisting woman pulled him back firmly. The priest's voice cut through the ringing in Grace's ears. "It is done. The sacrifice is accepted." His tone almost sounded triumphant. The others around the circle began wailing and laughing at once, a bizarre cacophony as they raised their arms to the sky, praising the spirits that had answered. Grace fell back, coughing and retching at the metallic smell of her own daughter's blood on her hands. Her vision swam. She wanted to die at that moment, to fall into the earth with her children and never wake. But James was looking at her, wild-eyed and drenched in their son's blood, and she realized she had to hold on. The nightmare wasn't over yet. The priest stepped forward, carefully avoiding the spreading pools of blood. He took a third knife offered by the old woman. This one was larger, a curved blade. "One final offering," he said in a guttural tone, as though someone, or something, spoke through him. "The pact must be sealed with the tools of creation, so neither of you may undo what has been done." Grace didn't understand at first, but the old woman grabbed her by the shoulders from behind, holding her in a surprisingly strong grip. The other female assistant seized James in the same way. James struggled weakly, drained by grief and shock. Grace was too numb to resist as the priest came to her first. She felt the point of the blade against her belly, low and sharp. With a swift motion, the priest drew the knife across her lower abdomen. Grace gasped in pain as a line of fire cut through her flesh. Blood welled from the gash across her womb. The priest did not even look at her. He then moved to James. Another swift motion, and James let out a cry as the blade sliced through the front of his trousers, nicking the flesh underneath just enough to draw blood. A searing pain spread through James's groin and he howled, not just from the cut, but from a deeper agony that lanced into his very core. Grace felt similarly, a throbbing radiating from her womb inward, as if something vital was pulled out of her being, leaving emptiness behind. The priest raised the bloodied blade to the sky. "Their fertility is given, their lineage is cut off and offered to the spirits. So shall wealth flow to them and never depart, for they have given all that they are." Lightning cracked across the sky in that instant, followed by a deep roll of thunder. The sudden storm wind blew, guttering the candles, making the flames leap crazily. It felt as if unseen forces rushed into the clearing. Grace clutched her wounded abdomen, her dress soaking with blood, and looked up at the swirling dark clouds. She swore she saw shapes in them, faces, laughing, jeering faces, as the others around her laughed too, arms still raised. James collapsed to his knees, sobbing and half-conscious. The two tiny bodies lay motionless on the ground between him and Grace, blood mixing with the rain that now began to pour. The old woman knelt by Grace, shielding her from the rain with her shawl, and spoke into her ear amidst the chaos. "It is done, my dear. The wealth is yours now. The pain will pass, and you will heal. Riches will fill the void. All that you desire shall come to you." Grace turned her face up to the old woman's, eyes hollow. "My children," she mouthed, her voice lost in the thunder. "My babies." The woman's expression flickered, just a hint of something like pity. Their sacrifice will not be in vain. They are with the spirits, at peace. Then she stood and addressed the cult. "We must go. The spirits have accepted, but we must conclude the ritual elsewhere." The drumming had stopped. The figures began to scatter quickly, melting into the trees as the storm raged harder. The old woman motioned to the two who had held the children. Efficiently, as if this were a choreographed routine, they gathered up the lifeless little bodies and wrapped them in a white cloth. Grace tried to reach for Emma's body or scream to leave them, but dizziness overcame her. The slash on her abdomen throbbed and darkness encroached on her vision. James crawled to her side, ignoring his own wound, and cradled her as the rain washed over them. "Grace! Grace!" he cried, patting her cheek as her eyes rolled back. The last thing she remembered was the taste of rain and salt on her lips, and the sound of James's anguished cries mingling with thunder. Grace awoke in her own bed, if one could call their mat a bed. Sunlight streamed harshly through the slats of their shack. For a moment she thought it was all a horrible dream. Then she moved, and a lance of pain shot through her abdomen. She looked down. Her midsection was bound tightly with a new white cloth, stained pink with blood. The reality flooded back with sickening clarity. She bolted upright, ignoring the pain. "Emma? David?" she called frantically, voice cracking. Perhaps, just maybe, it was a nightmare and they'd come running in, frightened by her screams. But the hut was silent. James sat in the corner, head in his hands. At Grace's call, he lifted his face. He looked hollow, eyes ringed in shadow, as if he hadn't slept at all. He probably hadn't. "They're gone, Grace," he said, voice raw and barely above a whisper. Fresh grief crashed over her. Grace clutched the cloth around her middle, rocking back and forth. "What have we done? What have we done?" She wailed softly, teeth chattering though the morning was warm. James crawled over and wrapped his arms around her, and they wept together for a long time, huddled in misery. No one came to question them. No neighbor seemed to know about the horrors of the night. The neighbor girl who watched the kids never returned. She vanished from Ayobo that day, perhaps paid off or frightened into silence. When other tenants asked where Emma and David were, Grace heard James mutter some lie about sending them to stay with a relative in the village. The words cut her to the core. For days, Grace and James moved through life like ghosts, too traumatized to even think about what would happen next. Grace half expected the police to show up or lightning to strike them dead for their sins. But by the end of that week, something happened. James got a call from an old acquaintance, a man he'd once done odd jobs for. The man offered James a position as a supervisor at a new construction project in the city, an unheard-of opportunity, given James's lack of formal education. The pay was more money per month than James had made in the last 2 years combined. James accepted in a daze. The very same day, Grace encountered an old client from the salon who insisted on repaying a debt Grace had long forgotten, a sum of money Grace had loaned the client in a moment of pity. Suddenly, Grace had more cash in hand than she had seen in ages. From there, events cascaded rapidly. James excelled at his new job. His boss was mysteriously pleased with him and promoted him within a month. Money flowed in, first in trickles, then in a torrent. By 3 months, James had networked with powerful figures and started his own small contracting business, which inexplicably won several lucrative government contracts in quick succession. Grace found a mentor in a wealthy businesswoman she once cleaned for, who helped her start an import trade in luxury goods. It was as though every step they took turned to gold beneath their feet. Every night, though, Grace would wake up screaming from nightmares of Emma and David, their faces pale and bloodied, little hands reaching out to her. James, too, grew haunted. He barely slept, throwing himself into work during the day and drowning in alcohol at night to escape the guilt gnawing at his soul. Whenever they were alone together, the silence of their home was unbearable, full of absence. Grace had packed away the children's few belongings, but she often caught herself reaching for them. A rag doll Emma used to carry, the plastic toy car David loved. These ghosts of memory filled their new, nicer apartment just as surely as real spirits would. Within 2 months of the ritual, they moved out of Ayobo to a better part of Lagos. As their fortunes soared higher, they set their sights on the pinnacle of luxury, Banana Island. Less than a year after that dreadful night, Grace and James Williams found themselves living in a mansion on Banana Island, the most exclusive enclave in Lagos. It was a palace compared to their former life. A white multi-story home with marble floors, chandeliers imported from Italy, a view of the tranquil lagoon behind manicured gardens. They had staff now, a cook, a driver, a cleaner. The irony never escaped Grace. She sometimes stared at the cleaning girl and felt sick, remembering herself. Expensive cars filled their garage, and designer clothes hung in Grace's walk-in closet. They threw lavish parties for clients and new friends. High society people smiled and toasted with them, praising James as a business genius and Grace as an elegant philanthropist. For she gave generously to orphanages and children's charities, an act she hoped might somehow atone for her sin, though nothing ever could.